has very generously given some time here today to come and speak with us and share a bit of his knowledge. So I might just pass it over to Jack. If you want to do a bit of an intro into who you are and a bit of your background, then we can go from there.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that, Amber. So yeah, I'm Jack. I've been sort of working in so originally went to Auckland University and did computer science and logic and computation. I think back in 2019 I graduated. And I've been working on some various software and kind of data roles since then. So I've been mainly in the finance and consulting space. So I'm at Jarden now, sort of working in investment banking, kind of the trading area. But have previously worked at one of the big fours and big retail bank as well. So I've kind of ran the whole sort of stack of kind of technologies from sort of dynamics development to now kind of focusing on data engineering, doing sort of Spark and Databricks kind of stuff, and a bit of data science and machine learning stuff in there as well. So yeah, that's kind of my career background. As far as, because I understand you guys are just coming off the back of doing certs and things, I've done a few of the Azure ones as well. So I've done the data engineering one and the AZ fundamentals, and I've been meaning to do some more. I've done the content, just haven't booked in. But yeah, so that's my background. So yeah.
Cool, awesome. You mentioned something there which could be quite interesting to dive into. You said Databricks. I think for a lot of people here, they'd be thinking, you know, what? Could you explain what Databricks are and perhaps, you know, why you would use them?
Yeah, sure. So they're kind of sort of one of the big kind of, I guess, not really a startup anymore. I think they've got about 5,000 employees. But they're, so there's Apache Spark, which is an open source kind of technology that's used by pretty much every sort of company that has kind of big data processing needs, if you think sort of in the millions and billions of rows of data. So like that's what a lot of banks use for the end of day kind of processing and things, Apache Spark. So Databricks is kind of like a managed service offering of that. So you could, trying to think how you can think of it as, I guess like writing Word into a text pad is, you know, anyone can do that, and Microsoft Word kind of manages that a bit. So it's kind of a managed offering of a open source technology, which works really well, and that's quite big kind of in the data space at the moment. It's quite a bit of demand for it.
Interesting. So when you're, I mean, what kind of roles have you had at these companies where you're using these technologies? Because they sound pretty cloud related, right? Sounds like you're working with very large amounts of data that you've done some certs in Azure and things like that. You said you worked at one of the big four, but you know, what roles have you actually had for people who are thinking, you know, well, where am I going to be 5 years from now?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I started off working in big retail bank over at Westpac. And my first kind of role out of the grad program was we're working on, so there's a space of banking, institutional banking. And that's kind of where, you know, I don't know, maybe you see in movies or something, the guys on the phones with TV screens all around them yelling at each other. So it's that kind of, we're doing the end of day processing for them. So after they've done all their trading for the day, we're sort of netting out all the losses and gains and things like that, and various sort of statistics with finance teams. And as you can imagine, sort of with those kind of like high frequency sort of trading, there's sort of millions and millions of rows that are produced each day from the trading. So what we'd do, we'd have a process that would run at the end of each day that would, yeah, sort of gather various statistics on that trading and send it over to the finance team for their kind of financial analysis. So that's one of the, but there's been some quite good other ones. For example, I guess when I was consulting, it wasn't me who did it, but with road policing, there was another team. They were gathering various roading statistics to kind of predict sort of high kind of crash areas and various other things. on that. So those are some of the sort of the use cases. I guess anything that when you need to process sort of enormous amounts of data, that kind of Apache Spark and Databricks kind of platforms are great for that.
Very cool. And so when you were doing, I mean, the road thing sounds really interesting, right? Getting all this data and then trying to predict when there's going to be a crash. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more or less. That's that's what was trying to be predicted, kind of the at-risk sort of roads. I guess when you see those sort of signs that say this is a high crash area or something, yeah, I imagine some of that feedback would have been used from the from that consulting job.
Very cool. Okay, so that was a consulting role that you went into. You like worked on that project for a little bit and then continued on with other things. Is that right?
Yeah. So that was kind of the nature of consulting. That sort of typically is you'll have sort of a so if sort of anyone goes to kind of those big four kind of places after university, it's sort of you'll typically sort of be on a job or on a project for about sort of like 2 to 3 months kind of average. Might be longer, might be shorter. But you usually produce some sort of deliverable to deliver to a client, and then they'll work with that from then on.
Very cool. And which big four were you at? Were you at the PwC or the Accenture?
The blue one. Yeah. KPMG.
Oh, KPMG, classic.
Yeah.
All right. And how was that? I mean, I've heard the interview process can be pretty rough, and then working there can be very high stress. Do you want to give people a bit of an insight into, what it's like working there at all?
Yeah, totally. So the biggest contrast I found sort of working between kind of I've always sort of thought of them as kind of like a product focused job where you're working on a product, or a consulting like focused job where you're consulting, you're selling your skills. So I found the biggest difference was, I guess with the product focused jobs, the day to day can sometimes be made a bit mundane. Like it is a lot more stable, but on the upside, it's a bit more relaxed. And you really do get into the nitty gritty of problems. So if you're very like details focused, that can be quite good. Like for example, like where I'm working now in the trading space, we'll be trying to eke out for our we'll be streaming orders and doing analytics on those, and we'll be trying to eke out sort of every last little bit of latency to get that as real time as possible for analytics. Which typically you wouldn't go down to that kind of level of detail in consulting. Consulting was typically a lot more the projects you'd be trying to get through quite a bit quicker. And yeah, I found it the work was quite interesting. So you'd quite varied. So if you don't want to stick into like one industry, or you're not 100% sure, I guess, what sort of industry you want to go into, as easy it is to change, it's quite a nice way sort of early on in your career to kind of experience a number of different things and kind of decide what you like on after that.
Yeah, is that what you did? Is that why you ended up there? Because you weren't too sure where you wanted to go, or?
Yeah. The variety sort of definitely appealed to me. I first sort of looking for, when I was thinking of leaving the job I was at and going to another, the variety of the consulting role definitely drew me to it because I was sort of quite young and wanted to sort of expand my skills as early on as possible.
Yeah, and how long were you there? How long were you at KPMG?
Was there about a year.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then in that time you worked on how many different projects in a year?
Yeah, so there were probably I think probably just under half a dozen. It was quite cool, sort of range from power repricing to sort of workplace analysis work for parliamentary services and things. So yeah, it truly was very, very varied. But sort of at the end of the day, it was all analytics work, but you do get to dive into various different kind of industries and things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found that really valuable.
Because your background's in software, is it?
Yeah. So I did computer science and logic and computation at university. So kind of like, I guess, the math heavy version of comp sci.
Yeah, but then you've ended up, it sounds like, in a lot of data analysis, like a lot of big data sort of roles. Is that the norm, do you think, in industry at the moment? Are you seeing a big rise in that?
Yeah, it's been trying to think what sort of backgrounds of the people that I work with are. Yeah, you get quite a varied sort of range of people. Like a grad in my team, for example, who's got a PhD in psychology, and then another one masters in economics and things like that. So you definitely don't need a comp sci background for it. I find it helps sort of in the more kind of like nitty gritty technical stuff. But then like the others have their strengths. So when there's like analysis work and report writing and things like that, like guys that have done not biology, sorry, psychology and economics definitely have their strengths there. So yeah, as long as like I guess you come from a somewhat sort of numerical kind of background, then yeah, you can just sort of play your strengths. So yeah, people come from very varied backgrounds in sort of data engineering and data science.
Awesome. So a year is, I don't know if a year is a short amount of time at KPMG or like quite a long amount of time there.
Yeah.
What's the kind of average stay there, would you say?
Yeah, I guess you see, trying to think sort of friends and stuff that have gone those consulting roles. I think grads typically stick around for sort of anywhere between sort of 1 to 3 years, and then some quite like it and want to stay on a bit more. But I think that's quite common sort of early on in your career, chopping and changing a bit, trying to find out what you like. Which sort of I've done. But yeah, if you like something, then you sort of stick to it. Like I've got friends that have been at the same company since they graduated, and you know they still love it. So yeah, there's definitely your own path that you take.
For sure. So you've figured out what you like? Have you found it?
Yeah. I think I quite like the finance sort of industry. It's quite good. You get sort of quite interesting problems as far as like quite interesting technical problems. So in the trading space, I like to sort of like it's quite cool being able to nerd out on all the kind of all those sort of minimizing latency and sort of how memory gets distributed across all your clusters and stuff that you're trying to manage. Which yeah, I absolutely froth, but some people would probably absolutely hate that. So yeah, different strokes for different folks, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting because when I think of, finance and especially the tech stack behind finance, I think like it's first of all, it's got to be huge. There's a lot there. And also like the quality has got to be so high because you can't really like be having bugs or be having like, huge crashes when it's a bank, right?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, there's sort of quality and sort of stage gates that are built in to the software development kind of process. That was definitely one of the biggest learnings for me when I was leaving after I left university and started working in sort of in a real job. Because university, at least with sort of like comp sci, it sets you up really well with the programming sort of fundamentals. Like I'm sure like most of you guys that have done sort of comp sci or a related degree can probably code up like a little website, things like that. Most sort of problems that you want to solve, you can sort of do. Might take a few days, but you can do them. But the biggest thing I found was when I started working was the like adapting to sort of working in a team when you're doing software development. So writing code that other people can read easily, writing code that testers can test, or writing the tests yourself. Doing things like I guess like a bit of time management as well. So having parts of code be ready at certain times, not necessarily like it's all well and good to have it working by the deadline, but you might need to run it through a testing cycle, and there might be some part of code that touches, say, like the bank's mainframe or something, so they'll have to get approved by a GM or a CTO or something. So yeah, definitely the like the software engineering kind of principles, I guess, of working in a team and things like that. That was definitely the biggest learning curve when I started working.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, is there a way that students can kind of get into that before getting into a job? If they're thinking like, oh yeah, that sounds really valuable, but I don't have a mainframe bank system and I don't have, a separate team that needs to approve all my stuff. It's just me at uni. Is there a way that they can start to learn some of these skills before they get there?
Yeah, totally. So I guess so I've started sort of doing it recently, sort of contributing to open source software. So I'm helping out on the Apache Spark one, and so those kind of open source platforms, they follow a lot of the same principles that corporate development follows. So you'll pick a ticket on Jira, you solve that, which is like a backlog system for managing issues. And then you have to create a port. So you'll fork the repository, and then you do a PR into that fork and run the tests on it, and then you have to do a code review from the people that own the repository or run the repository. So if you're, I guess following that, like, it's slightly different to corporate development because it's kind of all online and kind of email based. But yeah, even just sort of reading the guidelines of how sort of those open source projects work, I think will kind of give you a lot of kind of insight on how kind of corporates work in the development practices.
So it sounds like it's more about, working in a team and how do you develop when you're part of a much bigger project, right? And you're looking for those bigger projects and these open source things, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's because you can be quite productive on your own as a developer, but there's kind of that critical sort of inflection point, I suppose, when the project is so large that you do need multiple developers to be working on separate parts of it. I guess there's a bit of an efficiency loss, as in like that single developer can't be quite as fast. But when you can work together smoothly, then it does greatly increase the velocity of that project. So yeah.
Can you remember when you first started doing open source stuff? Because I think a lot of people here, for them, this might be the first time they've heard of open source.
Yeah.
So can you remember when you first started? Were you was it like, what is going on, or how did you get started? Did you jump straight into the Spark GitHub and start forking and stuff, or how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I only started doing it about sort of 3 months ago or so. So I'm just finding a link. Let's chat down here. So I've just put a link in the chat, and that's kind of the Apache contribution guidelines. So even reading those gives a good sort of high level overview of what that contributing kind of process is like. I kind of did it the hard way. I learned it doing sort of stumbling through kind of corporate kind of development and things first. But it was quite good. I had quite good supportive teams, and they sort of held my hand sort of all the way through until I was comfortable with kind of doing it sort of myself and a bit more independently. Which is also, I guess, like another really good tip is when you're an intern or a graduate, I guess your greatest priority would probably be learning about kind of the company that you're in, like a lot of the business sort of rules and business kind of context. And that I think because technical skills are great, but a lot of the problems are kind of in that kind of in the business context space. So yeah, definitely try to learn as much from the people around you when you are an intern or graduate. But yeah, to answer the question, I've only been contributing for the last sort of few months to it. Learned the hard way through corporate development. But yeah, I think my corporate development kind of learnings would have been a lot more easier and guided had I known the high levels beforehand.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you've been out of uni since, what was it, 2019? So three bit years. And in that time, this is your third job?
Yeah, third job, yep.
Yeah. So done quite a few job switches in that time. For a lot of people here, jobs is like top of mind at the moment. Really interested in it. So do you want to talk us through each of those jobs that you got? How did you get them?
Yeah, so first one was Summer of Tech. Actually, that was when I was over at Westpac. So I interned there, I think from my second year of uni, and stayed on until I think it was about 2.5 years I was there in total. So that was really good. Sort of worked over the summer break with them and then stayed on working the sort of mid-sem and semester breaks until I graduated, then went into the grad program, and then eventually a software engineer. So yeah, I think it was a little over sort of 2.5, kind of 3 years that I've been there. So yeah, after that, I sort of wanted to spread my wings and go into consulting, and then which was quite good. So I was there. Sorry, and to answer how I got that summer of tech job. So yeah, that was just the normal kind of applications for summer of tech and sort of interviews with Westpac and things. They weren't terribly technical, the interviews initially for the grad roles and things, but it was more just about kind of how you work in a team, kind of sort of are you kind of how interested is the wrong word, but sort of what do you want to do in tech and how do you wish to contribute and things like that, kind of those fundamentals for how you're going to grow as a developer sort of later on down the line. So then, so after about, yeah, so after I was at Westpac for a while, decided to go to KPMG, and that was really good. Worked on some quite interesting sort of projects over there. So did a bit of power repricing work, did some analysis work for parliamentary services. So yeah, it was quite varied. And it varied sort of from the highly technical sort of kind of economics and sort of pricing modeling and things like that to doing report writing and things like that. So yeah, very varied, which is quite cool. And then I'd kind of always had this dream of sort of working in the trading and investment banking space, and an opportunity popped up for that with an old colleague. So yeah, that was that's how I'm in the current job that I'm in now, and yeah, loving it.
So how did you get the job at KPMG?
Applied on LinkedIn, had a couple interviews, and that was that. So that was sort of moderately kind of technical. So it'd be working through sort of kind of previous projects that I'd worked on and things, and sort of how they'd kind of impacted the business and kind of what they'd sort of done. And I found that's been really useful, sort of in interviews all the way from internship ones up to now, is being able to talk about kind of personal projects and things. So if you've got some sort of interesting project that you've done, interviewers sort of love to hear about it, even if you think it's sort of completely unrelated to the job you're interviewing for. It's good to sort of show that you got a bit of interest.
Yeah. Have you had to do many technical interviews, Jack, when you're doing these jobs or applying for them?
Yeah, plenty of technical interviews, especially sort of in the kind of trading and investment banking space. When I was going for grad jobs there were lots and lots of online coding assessments and those kind of quick math kind of ones where you have to sort of quickly deduce statistics on things. Which yeah, everyone hates them, but I guess you got to do them, right?
Yeah. How did you find those? Like, how did you prepare for them? Like you said, a lot of people really hate them, like with a passion.
Yeah.
So how do you get through them?
Yeah. There's no, I guess there's no cheat code to it. It really is just sort of practicing them. Maybe like I did it sort of well. I guess how I did it was I put aside sort of maybe so like 2-3 hours on a Sunday and just work through some problems on that. And then maybe if I had some time on the week, maybe another 1 or 2 hours. But yeah, you just sort of ramp that up as you're getting closer to applications and things. But yeah, it really is all just practice. You can go like, I think like LeetCode, HackerRank. I think they have like sort of free tiers where you can get problem sort of statements and things. But they are quite hard, so start off easy, work your way up, and yeah, I guess that's that.
Yeah. How far in advance did you start practicing? So let's say that you were thinking, all right, well, my job, like I want to get the job by the end of the year. When would you start practicing these interview questions?
Yeah, so probably I guess kind of sort of always have it on my mind like the whole sort of year, but I guess actually sort of formalizing that practice, I guess probably a few months out. I would always put studies first. So I wouldn't like not study for an exam or something, to focus on studying for leak code or something. Because yeah, always put your studies first. But yeah, I'd try and for about 3 months out from aiming from actually applying for the jobs.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, 3 months out is quite a bit, eh? Quite a bit of an investment to be doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I guess you don't need to. I say 3 months out. That's sort of ramping up. Like I wouldn't be maybe be spending like an hour a week when I'm 3 months out. Maybe just spending an hour a week and just kind of surveying, kind of have a look at the jobs that you want to apply for. So if you like want to apply for Facebook, kind of figure out kind of what problems they give you. Start researching like what their interview kind of process is like. And I wouldn't actually be sort of practicing. Maybe that would be like 2 months out or something, or a month out. But yeah, start that research process and start sort of looking around at what you think you might like, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of job titles, I mean, what's your? Can you say your current job title? Like, what is it actually in words?
Yeah. So just data engineer. I've got a pretty sort of flat structure where we are. So yeah, if you're a software engineer, you're a software engineer. If you're a data engineer, you're a data engineer. So I think there's about sort of 3 or 4 job titles that go across kind of our business unit. So product owners, directors that oversee it all, and then just all software developers and things. There are various bands and things that go through that for pay and stuff like that. But yeah, you're kind of either a individual contributor or a manager, I suppose you put it into those 2 categories.
Yeah. So I think that when you jump on LinkedIn and then you see hundreds of different job titles, and sometimes it can be very limiting. I find for students where they're looking for very particular job titles, junior software engineer, for example, and they might just completely discount a data engineer role. Do you have any advice for people who are searching for jobs? Like, how do you search for jobs and go through all of these different ones to find one that is going to be good for you?
Yeah, totally. I wouldn't be crazy picky when you are initially looking, because those junior roles typically do tend to be quite varied. So like when I was a graduate over at Westpac, I was doing sort of development on Dynamics 365, so a lot of kind of like front-endy customer relationship management software. I was doing a bit of SharePoint and C# development as well, creating web apps, and then ultimately landed doing kind of data engineering. And that was for all the rotations and things, but I've had similar sort of things when I was an intern. I wasn't doing rotations as an intern, and you do sort of work on quite a varied amount of kind of technology stack. So I wouldn't try to sort of pigeonhole yourself too early on. And so definitely, I guess when you're looking at the actual job postings, pay more attention to kind of the tech stack that's in there rather than the actual job title. Because like my job title is a data engineer, but a data engineer typically wouldn't be, I don't know, creating the infrastructure and doing networking and things like that. But that is still sort of all encompassed in my role. So yeah, definitely actually read the JD rather than just the title on it.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned a few certifications that you had with Azure, is it?
Yeah.
What were the ones that you've done?
Yeah, so I've done Azure Fundamentals, which is AZ 900, which I understand some of you guys have done. And then I did the Data Engineering Associate one. And I've been just finished the content for the Networking Engineer one, and I'm meaning to do the Architect ones as well. But yeah, I found those quite valuable. Because I guess the certs, they sometimes cop a bit of a bad rap, sort of from kind of the more sort of senior developers and things. But I find it really helps you sort of nail down certain skills, and it really tests you on kind of the nitty-gritty things. Like I've been like sort of working as a data engineer for about a year before I'd I sat the Azure Data Engineering Associate one. And I was using all the tools and things, but there were definitely questions that I wasn't able to answer on the first try round, that I didn't, just like, you don't typically get to on a day-to-day. So yeah, I definitely did find them valuable, and you do learn things. It sort of expands kind of your scope of what you might look at from outside your day-to-day work.
Yeah, for sure. What was involved in that certification? Because for people, you're right, they've just finished their current Azure one, or maybe they've done the AWS equivalent. They might do the Azure one. I mean, do you think it's a good next step to do, is to do that data one?
Yeah. Some of those the associate level ones, they sort of start to kind of narrow down into kind of sort of various professions. So like the data engineering one contained a lot of kind of Azure Synapse and various storage mediums in Azure. Likewise with the networking one, all the content on that covered sort of various like network engineering things. So stuff like you wouldn't do typically, just like things like address spaces on networks and things like that. So yeah, if you do, and it's a good way to find out sort of what kind of what you're interested in as well, and kind of what you'd like working with. Oh, sorry, I did the data science one as well from Azure. Just remember that. But yeah, so it's quite good to explore kind of what you might like as well. So if you do the data science one, you can actually see like what might be involved in data science as far as from an engineering perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to kind of describe the type of person that you think would be interested in the data science one, what would you say? Like it involves what sort of skills, and like, what sort of interest would you have? Yeah,
so I was I guess my initial interest was in it. I just didn't really know sort of how all those sort of technologies worked. So that's kind of what sparked my interest with it. So there's a lot of Azure Synapse, a lot of storage, a lot of sort of streaming use cases and things like that. So streaming data with low latency, things like that. So yeah, I guess because I guess the content's free on it. So for a lot of those certifications. So if you are interested, just take a look through the content or the high level kind of overview. And if you do think any of it's interesting, then go sort of read through the learning catalog a bit more and set the thing.
Very cool. Just says usually what kind of interview format is it for the technical role? Online interview or face-to-face one?
I think, what have I had? I've had face-to-face ones and online when it was COVID. I typically prefer the face-to-face ones, just because it's like a little bit easier to kind of create a personal connection with the person that you're talking to. But yeah, they've generally been all face-to-face when possible. I remember we used to do over at Westpac when we were hiring for the graduates, there was a hackathon. So that was a 2-day kind of hackathon where people were in groups and would create a product over those 2 days. And that was really cool because you really got to see how people work together in a sort of team setting. So yeah, usually face-to-face.
Very cool. Awesome. Sweet. Any other questions from people on the floor? Just as we're going through it. I was interested, Jack, if you would ever consider going back to consulting.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. You see quite a lot of people kind of sort of later in their careers, maybe sort of like 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, lot go into contracting, which sort of always thought about, possibly a bit later on, sort of when I'm sort of a bit more skilled up. But that's sort of, I guess it's kind of a mix between consulting and working for yourself. So it's where you'll be registered as a contractor, and then you'll sort of contract yourself out to various companies. So you'll be working typically, I think most contracts are sort of kind of 3 to 6 months, even sometimes up to a year. But they'll generally be you'll go to a company and they'll pay you for those 3 to 6 months to complete some piece of work. fill in for a team member while they're, maybe on maternity leave or out of illness or something like that. So yeah, that would be quite interesting. A lot of people do that sort of later on in their careers. So yeah, that's always a possibility.
Very cool. I think we've actually got a talk next week on contracting from someone who runs a platform for contractors to find work. And he's talking about how to get started in a career with contracting. So
oh, nice. Yeah, yeah, definitely. If you guys are going to that talk, a lot of that, if you're thinking about going to consulting, there'll be a lot of parallels between the work and contracting and work and consulting. So yeah,
for sure. Another question here from Jess: how long would the whole interview process take, from job application to final interview?
All right. The quickest one I had was a day.
Really, a day, including the
yeah.
interview?
Yeah, because there was after the third interview, because of a counter offer. But they generally, I think, I don't know, for grad roles, are typically from applying to actually knowing if you've gotten the job, it would usually be sort of, I think, some 2 or 3 months usually. Quite a long time for the grad roles, but after that, generally, I think the process was about a month. I think that's pretty typical for most of the tech companies.
Yeah, I would second that as well. I think about a month for most of them. Usually it's like a couple of weeks or a week to close a job opening, and then it's like interviews, and then it's usually a couple of weeks after that.
Yeah, 100%.
Santino, when did you start completing certifications for Azure? Was this before or after you started working in investment banking?
Yeah, so I did Azure Fundamentals when I was a grad. It used to be a requirement to do the any of the sort of high-level certifications, so I just wanted to knock that out. So I did that pretty early on, I think, when I was a grad. And then I don't think I did any other ones while I was working as a grad. And then once I started working in the data engineering space, I did the data engineering one. And so that was quite good. So I learned quite a bit about sort of cloud sort of data engineering that was from Azure. And yeah, that was that. The data science one, that was when I was at KPMG. Just did it out of interest and used a lot of the actual kind of the managed Azure data science kind of offerings, like the machine learning workspace and things. So I wanted to check that out. So I went and did the exam. And then, yeah, networking one, which I managed soon. We need to do some networking work. So I decided to go through the learning catalog for it and learn about it. So yeah.
Awesome. Are you incentivized to do these at work, or is it something that you're just doing off your own accord?
Yeah, mainly just sort of off my own accord. Microsoft does run a program sort of for large corporates where they'll give you kind of a managed sort of kind of learning kind of portal, which is quite nice. But it is more or less just what you can get online for free. But yeah, as generally been, I've had a need to do something at work, so I've gone and sat the exam to kind of upskill myself and kind of validate my skills, sort of in tandem with doing the project.
That's quite nice, actually. I do know like a couple of other people who do that in consulting. So like at the end of every project, if they've had to use a certain tool, then they try and get like a certification at the end of that project as well, just to wrap it all up, and be like, that, while it's fresh. Is going to get that.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Yeah. Santino said, do you find yourself having to use other cloud platforms like AWS as well?
Yeah, there's a bit of so I've got kind of cursory knowledge on AWS. Definitely, like, still a beginner. If I went and sat the fundamentals sort of course on it, I probably wouldn't pass it. So I do kind of so we do have some AWS services that we do use where I am at the moment, but I typically don't interact with them a whole lot. So yeah, if I did have a sort of reason to work on it a bit more, I probably would go and do a certification just to kind of validate those skills. But yeah, I guess with sort of with that, I guess you can't know kind of everything. So one of my weak points is definitely AWS. So you do have to sort of leverage other team members in your organization as well. So it's kind of like part of that whole working in a team kind of stuff.
Sure. Would you say how many interviews for each role and how many days of interval between each interview usually?
Yeah, the day.
For jobs.
Yeah. The days varies quite a bit. Anywhere sort of between usually 2 in-person ones and maybe like a few rounds of technicals, depending on it. Sort of maybe one technical, 2 in-persons, or 2 technicals and 2 in-persons or something. Generally a mix of sort of technical and in-person, and somewhere between 3 and 5 of them is sort of what I've found. But it depends, I think, quite a bit on the company. Like a startup probably won't have such a long drawn-out process as, say, like a Netflix or a Google or something would.
For sure. Do you know many people who have landed roles at like the Netflix and the Googles and the Facebooks and things like that? I think for a lot of people in New Zealand, they feel a bit out of reach.
Yeah, I have. Oh, sorry. What was the first part of your question? Have I heard of anyone that has?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've had got a friend that works at AWS because they're starting to open up shop in New Zealand. AWS has. Microsoft, I think, is still mainly sort of accounts and kind of marketing and sales and things. And I think Google's got a software development team here as well. So yeah, the jobs definitely are in New Zealand. And I've had friends as well that sort of graduated from Auckland and ended up over in Sydney at Google, things like that. So yeah, definitely is attainable. I'd always just say apply, and the worst thing that they can say is no. So yeah, put yourself out there, and if it happens, it happens.
100%. I don't want to throw shade on like Victoria Uni, but I do see a lot of people from Auckland and from like Canterbury aiming for like very like more of the large tech companies and getting them. Whereas I didn't see too many students from Vic doing that. So I don't know if people just don't know about it, but I feel like there's also a push to say that you can. There's companies other than like Xero out there that you can be applying for as well, which like don't just limit yourself to what's in Wellington or New Zealand.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, there's another question here. I come from a non-technical background but have obtained the AWS SAA cloud certification and taken a Python course. I'm interested in finding a job related to cloud architecture. What should be my next steps to secure a position in the field?
Cool, nice. Yeah, I would say like the non-technical background like shouldn't be too much of like I don't know, shouldn't be too much of an obstacle to overcome, if any at all. We've got guys in the team that I'm in at the moment, and they've got like PhDs in psychology and a sort of economics backgrounds and things like that. So they're not terribly technical. I guess my advice would be sort of when you are applying for those, kind of try and make it obvious in your CV and sort of cover letters that you do really have this kind of passion for wanting to work in technology and cloud sort of space. Just because, and maybe sort of show that off that you do want to do this. Like you've got the certifications and things. But I don't know, maybe you can build some sort of cool sort of maybe containerized application with Python or something like that, just to show that you really are sort of this is really what you want to do. But yeah, that'd be my advice if you come sort of from a non-technical background. Just show off that you really do want to be in that technical kind of space.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. All right, I think we're kind of reaching the end of it. So if anyone does have any more questions, then pop them in the chat. I think that the financial services and tech is often one that isn't really talked about a lot, but I know there's some actually quite large companies. So if people are thinking, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, like being in that investment space, but on the tech side, would you be able to recommend some companies that they could look at to get started?
Yeah, so I guess like all the big sort of all the big banks are quite good. There's as far as like hedge funds and things like that, and kind of investment banks and stuff, there's not a whole lot in New Zealand really for that. But the definitely in the big sort of retail banking sector. And I found sort of when I was working there in retail banking, it is sort of very one of those few places where there are those, like in New Zealand, where there are those sort of like very large and distributed systems. So other than kind of going to kind of some of those big tech companies and things over in the States, there's very sort of few places in New Zealand where you can learn about those large distributed kind of systems. So yeah, definitely finance is a really big one for that. I imagine places like, Trade Me and stuff, I imagine they would have kind of like full over data centers and stuff like that. But yeah, the bigger the company, typically the more you kind of get exposed to that kind of larger scale sort of stuff, which I found quite fascinating.
Sure. Cool. Santino says, did you have any side projects that you would work on outside of work before getting deep into secondary industry? So maybe if you can think back to, when you were a student, what kind of side projects did you have going there? Or maybe what ones did you wish that you'd had, would have been a good idea.
Yeah, so I guess one that I've always thought is quite cool, I've seen it on people's CVs, is like a link to their website. So if you build like a website from scratch and have that kind of have some cool sort of like tricky stuff on that, that's always quite cool to show off your skills, because it's it's literally like right in front of you and you wrote it, which is quite cool. As far as side projects and things, I remember do sort of try and take learnings from university. So any of like the data science kind of courses that I'd done, I'd try sort of change the use case and apply that to something else. So like remember I did a computational biology paper, and that was all on predicting like the mutation rates on DNA. But then I sort of changed the use case for that to predicting like price movements in a stock based on like various inputs, which like wasn't very good because I used weather inputs as like a for how a stock price might change, but it had all the same sort of statistical like fundamentals, which was quite cool. So yeah, just anything like that you're interested in and that you're curious about is quite cool to see. Like I've always sort of when we've been sort of interviewing graduates and things, just saying that they're sort of passionate about something and they have like a deep knowledge or some deep passion about some kind of niche thing is quite cool to see.
Yeah, 100%. That actually got me thinking, Santino, on something which could be really cool, because I remember doing something similar, Jack, where I think we were doing like a mobile app development course at uni, and I kind of took that and then used it to create a project, which is what like I showed and put on my website and stuff. But a cool challenge, honestly, if you're going back to uni this year, you're like, all right, well, I have 8 papers coming up. For every paper, maybe try and take a bit of it and build something out of it, or even just take an assignment and see, all right, well, I'm just going to post this on GitHub and then I've got a project. And so by the end of the year, you'd have 8 projects to talk about. I just think that could be a really cool challenge, because you're going to end up with some weird stuff, which you might not have thought otherwise. But it's I imagine, like kind of what Jack was saying, it's probably quite an easy way to reuse what you've already learned, and just show it in a bit of a different way. Could be cool.
Yeah, 100%. Just make sure you don't upload your uni assignments.
Yeah, for sure. Otherwise, everyone's going to be looking the same. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. All right, Jack. Well, do you have any kind of last advice for people who are at this stage? I mean, they're finishing off the course this week, so after this, they've got their certifications, and they're either back to uni or off to look for jobs. Any advice for people at this stage in their lives?
Yeah, I guess just always be sort of open-minded to kind of various opportunities that come your way, even if it doesn't seem perfect. The opportunity or the job role or something, still kind of deeply consider it. First roles kind of vary quite a bit, and even if it is not exactly what you want, and it turns out it isn't what you like, you kind of know what you don't like now. So yeah, don't be too picky, and yeah, just show sort of passion in the field, and I guess that'll probably set you up for success pretty well.
Epic. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jack, and thanks everyone for coming along. Lovely to see you on this fine Wednesday. So enjoy the rest of your days, and yeah, we'll see you in the next session. Thank you so much again, Jack. Really good to see you.
Cool. No worries. Cheers, guys.
See you later.